We live in an age that idolizes pleasure: food, sex, comfort, digital validation, real-time dopamine. Everything is designed to make you feel pleasure, constantly, superficially, frantically. But what if this unbridled pursuit of pleasure is actually the clearest symptom of our fragility? What if, as Machiavelli might argue, pleasure is a trap disguised as freedom, a lure to make man manipulable, weak, easily controlled by those who understand the true game of power? The philosophical problem here is hard. What is more dangerous, pain or pleasure? Machiavelli, who saw the world as it is, not as we would like it to be, would probably say that continuous pleasure makes man slack, soft, and vulnerable. He wasn't talking about Christian morality or Puritanism. He was talking about efficiency, survival, political and personal strength. And in this, pleasure can be a much more effective trap than fear. A hungry man fights, an overfed man falls asleep, and when he sleeps, he is dominated. This moral dilemma is increasingly urgent in the modern world. We are surrounded by instant promises, comfort, stimulation, gratification. But Machiavelli taught us that power is concentrated in the hands of those who know how to say no to their own impulses, those who master their own desires rather than being swept away by them, those who control themselves and thus control others. In this video, we will explore this tension: pleasure as weakness and discipline as the true form of freedom. The question that guides this reflection is not a comfortable one. Are you free, or are you just distracted by pleasure? We will explore chapter by chapter this philosophical path that blends political realism and profound existentialism. Niccolo Machiavelli, the strategist of bare reality, will be your guide. And in the end, the provocation will be inevitable. Will you continue seeking pleasure at any cost? Or will you begin to govern your own impulses? If Machiavelli were to resurface today, amid influencers, endless entertainment platforms, and dopamine in digital pills, he might say with a cold smile, "It's easier to govern now. The people already keep themselves distracted." And maybe, just maybe, he's right. In The Prince, Machiavelli makes it clear that the goal of any ruler is not to be virtuous in the Christian sense, but effective. And in this context, impulse control is the foundation of effectiveness. He saw virtue as the ability to shape one's conduct to the demands of fortune. And to this end, mastery over pleasure is central. Men, in general, judge more by their eyes than by their hands, he writes. In other words, the appearance of strength is more important than inner goodness, and one of the quickest ways to lose that appearance is to give in to pleasure irrationally. For Machiavelli, constant pleasure destroys discipline, and discipline is the core of virtue. A person who indulges too much in pleasure loses his sense of danger, his focus on strategy, and his readiness to act with rigor when necessary. He becomes dependent on affection, comfort, consensus, and the validation of others. He weakens internally, and as a consequence, becomes manipulable externally. A leader who seeks to please everyone loses respect. A citizen who seeks pleasure at any cost loses his sense of direction. Weakness begins as desire and ends as dependence. There is an unspoken tension between pleasure and power. For Machiavelli, power demands cold blood. It requires being willing to be hated if necessary to maintain order. And those who constantly seek pleasure, approval, comfort, acceptance are not willing to pay that price. Pleasure is addictive, and the addict is predictable. The predictable is manageable, and the controllable will never be sovereign. This is the cold logic Machiavelli proposes, and it applies not only to princes, but to anyone who wants to be master of their own life. In the modern world, this philosophy resonates with frightening clarity. We live as subjects of algorithms designed to give us pleasure every second, infinite scrolling, likes, notifications, everything to keep us satisfied and therefore paralyzed. Machiavelli, if alive, might not be writing about politics. He'd be teaching how to regain autonomy in an era where pleasure has become a weapon of domination. And that brings us to the next point. How does this idea manifest itself in everyday behavior? The principle is clear. Uncontrolled pleasure destroys the ability to lead, including over oneself. And for Machiavelli, this is unforgivable. The true leader, even if only of his own soul, is one who does not bow to easy desire, who knows when to refuse, who understands the price of force. Because those who surrender to pleasure surrender to the domination of those who dispense it. It's easy to think of pleasure as something intimate and harmless. A break after work, a sweet treat after lunch, a well-received compliment. But the problem begins when pleasure ceases to be conscious choice and turns into conditioned reflex. At this point, it stops being pleasure and becomes weakness. In the modern world, this doesn't happen by chance. It's planned. Digital platforms, companies, apps, leaders, and even personal relationships exploit pleasure as a way to keep you obedient, reactive, and distracted. And that's exactly where Machiavellian thinking becomes necessary. Whoever gives you easy pleasure is preparing you for disguised obedience. In relationships, the same mechanism repeats itself. The person who constantly seeks approval, validation, and emotional comfort ends up falling into a dynamic of dependency. They sacrifice their own will to keep the other person satisfied. They avoid confrontation, swallow frustrations, and conform to others' expectations. And all in exchange for what? Small moments of emotional pleasure, a caress, a compliment, the illusion of harmony. Machiavelli would write that this type of behavior is a sentence of weakness, because the individual who is not willing to lose pleasure never demands respect. And without respect, there is no influence. Without influence, there is no power. And without power, there is no freedom. At work, the logic is even crueler. Modern companies offer colorful beanbags, cool environments, snacks, and coffee as symbols of a humane culture. But behind this, there are often exhausting workdays, a lack of autonomy, and emotional manipulation. Power is exchanged for pleasure. Dignity is exchanged for benefits. Purpose is exchanged for distraction. The worker who accepts all this with a smile isn't happy. It's addicted to microdoses of pleasure that serve to keep him where he is. A modern prince who reads Machiavelli would know structure is not doing you any good. It is keeping you quiet. Machiavelli would say that unregulated pleasure makes us predictable, and those who are predictable are exploitable. That's why in Machiavellian logic, pleasure is only legitimate when it is controlled by the person who feels it and not imposed by the person who offers it. True power lies in knowing how to refuse, knowing how to postpone, knowing how to endure discomfort. Because the soul that doesn't sell itself for crumbs of pleasure is the only one that can build something lasting. Inner strength begins with resisting easy desire. So, in practice, pleasure needs to be treated as a dangerous currency. It can be exchanged for relief or for submission. It's up to you to decide who distributes it, your will or the world around you. Machiavelli would teach that the prudent ruler always observes the appetites of the people, because it is through them that the masses are controlled. And Nietzsche would say, the man who governs himself no longer desires like others. He desires deeper, higher, with purpose. And this difference changes everything. The great modern trap is to confuse pleasure with happiness and comfort with freedom. This is the most common mistake and the most devastating. The world sells the idea that the more you satisfy yourself, the happier you will be. But what actually happens is the opposite. The more you seek immediate pleasure, the less tolerant you become of pain, boredom, frustration, and waiting. You don't grow. You just get used to not feeling discomfort. And this turns you into someone fragile, reactive, dependent, a servant of your own anxiety, a prisoner of your own dopamine. This type of person is neither feared nor respected. They are manageable. And Machiavelli would say that in the chess game of life, the manageable is disposable. He warned, men offend either through fear or through hatred, and what offends the real world most is someone who can't say no to pleasure, who never denies a desire, who always seeks comfort. Because this person is always willing to trade their integrity for relief, and that for those in power is pure gold. The mistake is to think that pleasure is a reward, when in fact it's a trap in disguise. Another common mistake is to romanticize hedonism, as if seeking pleasure were a form of rebellious freedom. But this cheap hedonism isn't rebellion, it's a disguised conformism. Those who live in pursuit of pleasure aren't challenging the system, they're adapting to it. Because the modern system is designed for precisely this, to offer multiple forms of superficial pleasure so that you never have the time or the strength to pursue what truly matters. The hedonistic soul is not free. It's a slave to itself. Most fail because they confuse intensity with depth. They seek intense sensations, an orgasm, a like, a purchase, a trip, thinking they're living fully. But these experiences, if not connected to something deeper, only increase the void. And faced with this emptiness, the individual seeks more pleasure, and the cycle repeats. Nietzsche would call this the decay of the spirit. Machiavelli, political futility. Both would see in this the collapse of inner strength and the origin of all domination. The common mistake is this, thinking that pleasure is synonymous with freedom. For Machiavelli, freedom arises from the ability to resist pleasure, and for Nietzsche, from the courage to endure pain. Unbridled pleasure no longer gives you life. It robs you of the drive to conquer your own, and before you know it, you're being fed like a domesticated animal. Happy? Maybe. Free? Never. If there is one lesson that Niccolò Machiavelli hammers home with surgical precision, it is that world domination begins with self-domination. This isn't about asceticism or puritanism, but about a personal engineering of strength. Machiavelli didn't despise pleasure. He despised the weakness that arises from dependence on it. A ruler, or any human being who wants to influence their own destiny, must know how to endure discomfort, delay gratification, and act with calculation even in the face of temptation, not because they're cold, but because they understand an unshakable truth. Whoever rules his own desires rules others without raising his voice. The Machiavellian path is not easy, and it is not for everyone. It requires constant vigilance, not only against external enemies, but also against pleasures disguised as conquest. A promotion that compromises values, a comfortable but stagnant relationship, a compliment that prevents you from changing. All of this seems pleasurable until it reveals itself to be a prison. Machiavelli, with his stark insight into human nature, would say, avoid everything that makes you too docile, too grateful, too satisfied, because in that state you do not move, and those who do not move are moved. This path begins with small acts of resistance, saying no when everyone expects a yes, refusing easy gratification, enduring the discomfort of an unpopular decision, silencing the addiction to pleasing. With each strategic renunciation of pleasure, you regain a piece of your strength. Machiavelli saw this as the essence of virtue, not an external morality, but an internal force that commands respect by the simple fact of its existence. The man who refuses to bow to his own impulses inevitably becomes a disturbing presence, because his existence betrays the weakness of others. More than that, this man becomes dangerous, because he cannot be seduced, he cannot be manipulated, he cannot be bought, and that is precisely what the world fears and respects. The Machiavellian path, therefore, is that of brutal autonomy. Pleasure becomes chosen, not hunted, consumed in moderation, not addictively, experienced deeply, not serially. Pleasure in this context ceases to be an end and becomes a bonus, and those who treat pleasure as a bonus will never be enslaved to it. In practical terms, the path is this: deconstruct the myth that constant pleasure equals happiness. Rebuild your life based on direction, not desire. Practice refusal. Learn to say enough. Rediscover the silence between stimuli, and above all, embrace discomfort like a master. Machiavelli didn't seek the perfect life. He sought a life that makes sense. And this inevitably involves deconstructing pleasure as a supreme value, because true pleasure is being able to live without depending on it. We've reached the end, and perhaps the most uncomfortable question of all. Do you really want to be free, or do you just want to be satisfied? The difference is stark. The contented person lives like a domesticated animal, fed, distracted, protected. The free person, on the other hand, lives in conflict with themselves, with the world, with their temptations, because they know that every decision has a price. Every sacrifice strengthens. Every pleasure avoided strengthens even more. And that true freedom only arises when you can say no with conviction, even when everything inside you screams for a yes. Machiavelli, if he were alive today, would say coldly, "Pleasure is the most effective form of social control." And he wouldn't be wrong. It's never been easier to keep a population quiet, not with fear, but with distraction, not with oppression, but with gratification. Netflix, takeout, compliments from strangers on social media, emotional sedatives with every click. And the more pleasure, the less urgency. The more comfort, the less rebellion. Machiavelli would see in this the glory of the modern prince, to rule without needing to repress. It would be enough to offer pleasures, and submission would come with a smile. Nietzsche, on the other hand, would see this as the end of the human spirit. He would write that modern man lost his greatness by fleeing from pain, that he became small, harmless, domesticated, that he lost the will to power, the ability to create, the courage to say no, and he would be right. Because those who cannot bear their own emptiness without filling it with immediate pleasure will never be able to create greater meaning for your own life. He will, at most, be a consumer of other people's meaning. Pleasure isn't the villain. Weakness in the face of it is what destroys. And if this video is helpful at all, let it be in making you face this truth. Whoever is a slave to pleasure will never have the strength to face the real world. And the real world doesn't forgive the weak. It just absorbs them, uses them, shapes them, and discards them. Machiavelli knew this. Nietzsche shouted it, and now you know it too. The decision is yours. So reflect, are you truly living, or just being numbed by daily doses of superficial pleasure? If it is the second case, Machiavelli would leave a warning. Whoever accepts being entertained all the time accepts being dominated without realizing it. And Nietzsche would add, the only way back to the top is through the pain of reconstruction. The final question is simple, but cruel. Can you bear to live without pleasure for a while, to achieve something that lasts forever? If you've come this far, it's because something in you has already started to move. Maybe it's uncomfortable. Maybe it's anger. Maybe it's that awkward silence that only appears when the truth hits. But whatever it is, don't ignore it, because now you can no longer pretend you didn't know. The pleasure you pursue may be weakening you, and if you want to change that, it won't be enough to just watch another video. You'll have to take action. You'll have to choose discomfort. You'll have to stand up against your own habits. This channel isn't there to entertain you. It's there to disturb you, to make you question, break patterns, rebuild your mindset. If you seek truth, strength, and autonomy, you're in the right place. But be warned, there's no easy path here. There's confrontation. There's real philosophy applied to life. And if you want to continue this journey, you already know what to do. Leave a like, not on impulse, but by decision. Comment below. What pleasure do you have the most difficulty mastering? Or better yet, what pleasure do you need to eliminate now to regain control? Answer with courage, because writing this down is already the first act of strength. It's already a no to addiction, a yes to self-empowerment. Subscribe to the channel and activate the bell. not to follow content, but to stay sharp. Here, each video is a cut, a hammer blow, a spark. And if you come back for the next one, may it be ready for more, because the world outside won't give you a break, and here inside, neither will we. Pleasure distracts, pain transforms, awareness liberates. Now go out there and start fighting for yourself until the next showdown.